The watch shop. Not long after the visit from Carol, Mamma had a stroke. For 2 months she lay unconscious in bed while we took turns at her side. And then, one morning, her eyes opened and she looked around her. Eventually, she regained the use of her arms and legs enough to be able to move about with assistance, though her hands would never again hold her knitting needles. We moved her to Tante Jan's front room, where she could watch the busy life of the Bordejorlesront. Her mind was as active as ever, but the power of speech did not return, with the exception of 3 words: yes, no, and Corrie. Now, Mamma called everybody Corrie. It was astonishing, though, the quality of life she was able to lead in that crippled body. Watching her during the 3 years of her paralysis, I made another discovery about love. Mamma's love had always been the kind that acted itself out with a soup pot and sewing basket. Now that these things were taken away, she sat in her chair at the window and loved us. She loved the people she saw on the street and beyond. I learned that love is larger than the walls that shut it in. Nolly's conversation at the dinner table was more and more about a young fellow teacher at the school where she taught, Flip von Worden. Eventually, the young man called on Father to ask for Nolly's hand in marriage, and there was a Ten Boom wedding. Nolly was radiant that day in her long white dress, but it was Mamma I could not take my eyes off. She seemed young and girlish, eyes sparkling with joy at this great occasion. Betsy and I took her into the church early, and I believe that most of the Van Worden family and friends never dreamed the gracious and smiling lady in the first pew could neither walk alone nor speak. Not until Nolly and Flip came down the aisle together did I think for the first time of my own dreams of such a moment with Carol. I glanced at Betsy, so tall and lovely. Betsy had always known that, because of her health, she could not have children, and for that reason had decided never to marry. Now I was 27, Betsy in her mid-30s, and I knew that this was the way it was going to be. Betsy and I, the unmarried daughters living at home in the Bay. It was a happy thought, not a sad one. I knew for certain that God had answered my prayer 4 years ago, because with the thought of Carol came not the slightest trace of hurt. Bless Carol, Lord Jesus, I murmured under my breath, and bless her. Keep them close to one another and to you. I knew that was a prayer that could not have sprung unaided from Corrie Ten Boom. But the great miracle of the day came later. To close the service, we had chosen Mamma's favorite hymn, Fairest Lord Jesus. As I stood singing it, I heard behind me in the pew, Mamma singing too. Mamma, who could not speak 4 words, sang the beautiful lines without a stammer all the way through. It was a gift to us from God. In spite of that moment, her speech never improved, and 4 weeks later, in her sleep, Mamma slipped away from us forever. In November that year, Betsy began to sniff and sneeze. Father decided that she must not sit behind the cashier's table where the shop door let in the winter air. But Christmas was coming, the shop's busiest time. Tante Anna insisted she could cook and look after Betsy, so I settled in behind Betsy's table, writing down sales and repair charges, recording cash spent for parts and supplies, and leafing through records in growing disbelief. There was no system here anywhere. No way to tell whether a bill had been paid. No way, in fact, to tell if we were making money or losing it. Of course, Father was innocent of business know-how, as his father had been before him. He would work for days on a difficult repair problem and then forget to send a bill. The more rare the watch, the less he was able to think of money. A man should pay for the privilege of working on such a watch, he would say. One day I bought a new set of ledgers. Many nights after the door was locked, I sat for hours poring over inventories and statements. I developed a system of billing, and more my columns of figures began to correspond to actual transactions. I discovered that I loved it. I had always felt happy in this little shop with its tiny voices and shelves of small, shining faces. But now I discovered that I liked the business side of it too, the world of trade. I knew that Betsy's colds had settled in her chest and threatened to turn into pneumonia, as her colds always did. I would reproach myself for being anything but distressed at the present arrangement. At night, when I would hear her racking cough, I would pray with all my heart for her to be better at once. Then one evening, 2 days before Christmas, when I had closed up the shop for the night, Betsy came bursting in from the alley with her arms full of flowers. Her eyes, when she saw me, were like a guilty child's. "For Christmas, Corrie," she pleaded, We have to have flowers for Christmas." "Betsy," I exploded, "no wonder you're not getting better." "I've stayed in bed most of the time, honestly." She stopped while great coughs shook her. "I've only got up for really important things." I put her to bed and then prowled the rooms with newly opened eyes, looking for Betsy's important things. Betsy had made beautiful changes everywhere, things that would never have occurred to me, things that make a home. It became obvious that we had divided the work backward. Once we swapped responsibilities, it was astonishing how well everything went. The house had been clean under my care. Under Betsy's, it glowed. The food budget, which had barely survived my visits to the butcher and the baker, stretched under Betsy's management to include all kinds of delicious things. The soup kettle and the coffee pot on the back of the stove, which I never seemed to find time for, were simmering again the first week Betsy took over, and soon a stream of postmen and police, wobbly old men, and shivering errand boys were pausing inside our alley door to cup their hands around hot mugs, just as they had done when Mama was in charge. Meanwhile, I found joy in my work I had never dreamed of. I realized I wanted to do even more. I wanted to learn watch repair itself. Father eagerly took on the job of teaching me. I quickly learned the parts, the tools, and the techniques, and I became the first licensed woman watchmaker in Holland. So was established the pattern our lives were to follow for over 20 years. When Father had put the Bible away after breakfast, he and I went downstairs to the shop while Betsy plotted magic with 3 potatoes and a pound of meat. With my eyes on income and outlay, the shop did better. We were able to hire a sales lady for the front room, while Father and I worked in the back. There was a constant procession through this little back room. Sometimes it was a customer. Most often it was simply a visitor, from a laborer with wooden klompen on his feet to a business owner, all bringing their problems to Father. Often he would bow his head and pray for the answer. He prayed over the work, too. There were not many repair problems he had not encountered. But occasionally, one would come along that baffled even him. I would hear him say, "Lord, you turn the wheels of the galaxies. You know what makes the planets spin, and you know what makes this watch run." The answers to these prayers seem often to come in the night. Many mornings I would find the watch that we had left in 100 pieces, fitted together and ticking merrily. Even before Tante Anna's death, the empty beds in the Bayet were filled with a succession of foster children, who for over 10 years kept the old walls ringing with laughter. Willem and Noli were having families. Willem and Tyne 4 children, Noli and Flip 6. Willem had started his nursing home in Hilversum, 30 miles from Haarlem. Noli's family we saw more often, as their school, of which Flip was now principal, was in Haarlem. Most days, one or another of their 6 was at the Bayet to visit Opa at his workbench, or peer into Tante Betsy's mixing bowl, or race up and down the winding steps with the foster children. We first discovered Peter's musical gift around our radio, a large table model with an ornate shell-shaped speaker that brought us many years of joy. On Sunday afternoon, when Noli and her family were listening to a concert with us, Peter spoke up in the middle of a Brahms concerto. "It's funny they put a bad piano on the radio." "What do you mean, Peter?" asked Father. "One of the notes is wrong." The rest of us exchanged glances. What could an 8-year-old know? But Father led the boy to Tante Jan's old upright. "Which note, Peter?" Peter struck the keys up the scale till he reached B above middle C. "This one," he said. Then everyone in the room heard it. The B on the concert piano was flat. I spent the rest of the afternoon beside Peter on the piano bench, uncovering a phenomenal musical talent. Peter became my music student until, in about 6 months, he had learned everything I knew and went on to more expert teachers. Life for Father, Betsy, and me stayed essentially the same. Our foster children grew up and went away to jobs or to marry. The 100th anniversary came and went. The following day, Father and I were back at our workbenches as always. Even the people we passed on our daily walks were perfectly predictable. I went with Father on his daily stroll through the downtown streets. We took our walk always at the same time, after the midday dinner and before the shop reopened at 2, and always over the same route. Since other Haarlemers were just as regular in their habits, we knew exactly whom we would meet. Many of those we nodded to were old friends or customers. Others we knew only from this daily encounter. Father tipped his hat to all. While Haarlem and the rest of Holland strolled and bowed and swept its steps, the neighbors on our east geared for war. We knew what was happening. Often on the radio we would pick up a voice from Germany, a voice that only screamed. Even-tempered Betsy reacted most strongly, hurtling from her chair to shut off the radio. But when letters to Jewish suppliers in Germany came back marked "address unknown," we still believed that it was primarily a German problem. "How long are they going to stand for it?" we said. "They won't put up with that man for long." Once the changes in Germany reached inside our little shop. Germans frequently came to work under Father for a while, for his reputation reached beyond Holland. So when a good-looking young man appeared with apprentice papers from a good firm in Berlin, Father hired him without hesitation. Otto told us proudly that he belonged to the Hitler Youth. "The world will see what the Germans can do," he said often. Otto's first morning at work, he came upstairs for coffee and Bible reading with the other employees. After that, he sat alone down in the shop. When we asked him why, he said that Father was reading from the Old Testament, which, he informed us, was the Jews' book of lies. I was shocked, but Father was only sorrowful. "He's been taught wrong," he told me. "By watching us, seeing that we love this book and are truthful people, he will realize his error." In the end, Father fired Otto, the first employee he had ever discharged in more than 60 years in business. It was Otto's treatment of the old clock mender Christoffels that brought it about. From the very first I had been baffled by his brusqueness with the old man. It was not what he did, but what he did not do. No standing back to let the older man go first, no picking up a dropped tool. It was hard to pin down. One Sunday, when Father, Betsy, and I were having dinner in Hilversum, I commented on what I concluded was thoughtlessness. Willem shook his head. "It's deliberate," he said. "It's because Christoffels is old. The old have no value to the state. They're also harder to train in the new ways of thinking. Germany is teaching disrespect for old age." We could not grasp such a concept. "Surely you are mistaken, Willem," Father said. "Otto is extremely courteous to me, and I'm a good deal older than Christoffels." "You are the boss. That's another part of the system, respect for authority. The old and the weak are to be eliminated." We started watching Otto more closely. But how could we know? How could we have guessed that it was in the streets and the alleys outside that Otto was subjecting Christoffels to very real persecution? Accidental trippings, a shove, a heel ground into a toe were making the old clockman's journeys to and from work times of terror. Christoffels was too proud to report any of this to us. Only when one morning he stumbled into the dining room with a bleeding cheek did the truth come out. Even then Christoffels said nothing. But running down the street to retrieve his hat, I encountered Otto surrounded by an indignant cluster of people who had seen what happened. The young man had forced the older one into the side of the building and ground his face against the rough bricks. Father tried to reason with Otto as he let him go, to show him why such behavior was wrong. Otto did not answer. He collected the few tools he had brought with him and left the shop. At the door he turned to us briefly with a look of utter contempt.